My guest today is Kyle Hogan. Kyle is a former 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment Night Stalkers Deputy Commander. We discussed the Maduro raid, special operations training, the future of Army Aviation, the oil business, and more. Okay, let's go.
Conflict, politics, military-industrial complex, technology, war. The Flash Traffic Podcast.
So how's the oil business?
It's doing all right. It's doing all right.
You're an oil man?
I'm not the oil man. I'm the guy that's facilitating the commerce and the transmission of those tankers in and out of a refinery area in the port.
So you probably have some knowledge about the Russian ghost fleets that are transporting Venezuelan oil across the world and supporting the Russian war effort, or at least you have knowledge of the business, the industry.
Well, from an industry perspective, based on West Texas sweet crude from the Permian and the Eagle Ford, that is the ideal feedstock, if you will. So if you think of the oil industry as a bunch of bakers, and they're baking cakes and sending cakes or the product that they send out, the cleaner the ingredients you get, the better the product you get on the backside. So Venezuelan oil or Russian oil is known to be pretty dirty or heavy with lots of sulfur. And those feedstocks traditionally take a little bit of extra work to get them into a marketable product. Some refineries were designed to be able to handle that heavier feedstock, but in today's environmentally friendly geopolitical environment, they are not looked upon favorably. So they are often trying to transition to a cleaner feedstock, if all of that makes sense. So then when you talk about the ghost fleet, ghost fleets, my understanding, are primarily product it's a black market product. So they're trying to push, think of a flea market where you got a bunch of folks trying to buy Louis Vuitton bags, but not at Louis Vuitton prices. And that's the closest metaphor I can give to what they're doing with some of the ghost fleets, that they're taking unsanctioned oil and selling it below market value to continue to feed the needs of whatever that customer group is.
Right. And you told me earlier this week, you said that Chevron has a number of refineries in Texas that are set up just to receive the heavier Venezuelan oil. Because if I'm correct me if I'm wrong, Chevron is the only U.S. oil company in Venezuela still left.
Chevron is the only one in Venezuela, correct. But there's also a few, Exxon, Phillips 66 can handle heavy crude down at Sweeney. Valero has potential to handle heavy crude, and so does Citgo. Citgo's, if my understanding, if my background's correct, they were designed to be able to handle that heavy crude both in their Lake Charles refinery and their Corpus Christi refinery.
So we as a country might be well set up to actually accept the heavy Venezuelan oil. So we might not have that much of a lead time to start making money on Venezuela?
I believe there's across the petrochemical industry here in the South, there are refineries that have that capacity to be able to process that feedstock and turn that pretty rapidly to support whatever the administration determines is the end state of that product. Whether they're going to sell it for the Venezuelans or give it back to the Venezuelans for them to sell on the market. But to turn it rapidly, I believe across the industry, the U.S. is postured to support that pretty rapidly.
Well, one place that will probably not be getting that oil is Cuba. So times are changing for the global South in South America.
Absolutely, the entire hemisphere is in flux.
Yeah, that's right. Before you were an oil man, you were the deputy regimental commander for the SOAR, the Special Operations Aviation Regiment. And we talked last week on this podcast. We had an episode about the Maduro raid that was basically conducted by that unit in concert with Delta and a small FBI contingent. And apparently there was 2 Chinook helicopters that went into the compound and a number of Blackhawks, UH-60s, that CNN was calling something penetrator Blackhawks that had 30 millimeter cannons on it, specifically to provide air support, apparently for the operation. Could you tell us a little bit about the regiment and how things are organized, how you guys train, who you support? Apparently you support all of JSOC, Joint Special Operations Command.
Let me give you my standard disclaimer. I did serve for about 15 years within that organization, proudly did. Was privileged to come to work here every day on that compound. But I have some time gap from when I left in the summer of 22. So October of 1981, the 160th was established. From there, it had its first baptism by fire, if you will, in Grenada in 1983. Followed that up with a very similar operation in Panama in 1989. Operation Prime Chance, let me go back a little bit, 1987, where they were interdicting in the Persian Gulf tankers and vessels, ironic to what was taking place today. And then most folks are familiar with what took place in Mogadishu in 1993 with Sean Naylor's book and Mark Bowden, Black Hawk Down. All of those learning environments created a culture of customer focus, mission first characteristics, which are ingrained in every Night Stalker that walks onto the compound. And, as of my departure, they were an organization with a headquarters and 2 battalions there at Fort Campbell, plus a training battalion and a research and development organization, and then the sustainment organization that takes care of all the maintenance. 3rd Battalion down in Savannah and 4th Battalion at Fort Lewis, Washington, round out with the headquarters, 1-star headquarters at Fort Bragg. That's sort of how the organization is encapsulated and dispersed. They are loosely aligned with the geographical combatant commanders. 4th Battalion with PACOM, 3rd Battalion with SOUTHCOM, 2nd Battalion with EURCOM, and everybody had a mix in CENTCOM for a long time. The little bit of a distinction between 1st Battalion and the rest is that's the only organization that has the MD-500 Little Birds, or Mission Enhanced Little Bird, both an attack variant and a lift variant, as well as the Defense Armed Penetrator, the DAP, the armed version of the Black Hawk, and the lift version of Black Hawk. They're in 1st Battalion. What I jokingly say to a lot of folks, hey, we're just Black Uber. I'm going to show up and take the customer wherever they need to go. I don't get a vote on who I support. Everybody pays, everybody rides. Nobody rides for free. But the mentality of the organization has always been customer first. And I try to articulate that with other institutions or places where I've worked, and it's almost impossible to emulate that mission-focused mentality. And I think it has to do with, because the regiment supports all SOP operators, not branch-specific, usually in the SOF community, you are probably a little bit more driven, a little bit more meticulous, and a little bit more successful. There's probably more Eagle Scouts, team captains, Mensa members, if you will. You have the cream of the crop in the SOF community. And when iron sharpens iron, as they say, every day is an assessment, and you want to make sure that you perform at your best, not to let your customer down. So I rambled there for about a couple minutes. With that said, Tony, did I answer your question, or where are we at with that?
Yeah, that's a good laydown of how we got the SOAR and the 160th. What's the training like for an operation to go into a foreign country where you have never physically flown? How did these guys train for that, or how would you imagine that they trained? They had about 3 months to train up for this.
You're going to be given world-class facilities, equipment, and resources to ensure that you can execute a mission of national significance. When I talked about that mission focus, that starts in your green platoon aspect. So you're going to go through a various battery of experiences, whether it's shooting weapons, driving vehicles, flying aircraft, depending on your specialty skill set. And that training mentality continues throughout your time within the organization. So when you arrive from an aviator standpoint as basic mission qualified, you're just a basic pilot. And essentially what you've done is replicate the entirety of flight school in the green platoon environment to make sure that you can operate in any environment over water, mountain, desert mountain, uh, aerial refuel. So you're qualified at the basic level to do everything. And then each touch point you have with a customer group is another iteration of training that you're exposed to continue to refine your skills. Everything you do is focused on that training aspect. So when the time comes to do a rehearsal or uh, a mission of national significance, it's second nature to what you're doing. It's just another iteration, if that makes sense. So going to the technical side on rehearsing and getting models, they have a robust simulation section, and they're able to use GIS technologies and gaming systems, if you will, to be able to recreate many different environments. There's a lot of stuff that's open source, and then within the national intelligence community, they can pull to create visual simulations both on your mission planner and then within the larger interconnected simulators that the regiment operates as well. So you can come up with a virtual environment where you're flying what would be a perceived significant mission over and over again. And it's not do it till you get it right, it's do it till you can't get it wrong, where every scenario or unexpected contingency is played out. So you do the best you can to be able to already have an answer for the test before you take it.
When you as a pilot, when you heard, let's say for example, that you have Delta, you're going to be working with Delta, does the pucker factor go up since they are the top of the pyramid for special operators? Is it different when you know you're going to fly Delta?
It didn't matter which customer I had in the back of the aircraft. I always was as guarded as possible because you're only one mistake from ruining not only your own reputation, but the reputation of the organization itself. And I think that's where over the 20 years of GWAT, there potentially could have been a little bit of a hierarchy across the regiment early on who supported who. But as time and operations were drawn across those 2 decades, it forced everybody to operate at the same level. So you knew that you were going to get a quality crew no matter who showed up from a regiment standpoint. And that was reflected on treating every customer with the utmost respect and professional courtesy.
Okay, so basically, no, they professionals don't get nervous when they have different levels of special operators. Oh, you guys are just the Rangers. Okay, well we'll just make you fast rope out of here, or
Oh no,
no, oh you're Delta.
so,
We'll actually land on the building for you guys.
you're going to get your chops busted if you don't treat everybody pretty equally, and going to have to see these folks again in the future. So you don't want to slight
Right.
one for the other. I remember working
Right.
in the Joint Operations Center in Balad, and we had a bunch of different tribes that we were supporting, and there were times where one tribe was, hey, I got this going on, I got that going on, and I have to be as neutral as possible to ensure the fidelity of the target that they're going to execute, that I give them the best aviation support for what they're doing, as opposed to, hey, we're so and so, and you should just give us all the toys. So I did my best not to play favorites. There's a, I just got a message from a two-star division commander who was a major back then, and I remember working in the talk with him, and I may have favored his tribe a little more than others just because he treated me pretty well as we were doing jock duty together. But I think the world of him. I think he's a consummate professional. And in hindsight, we did our best to make sure that if a target was actually actionable, we gave them all the support we could.
Mm-hmm. I want to show you this. I'm going to share the screen. Hopefully you can see this. This came out yesterday from CNN, and the title is "Capturing a President: CNN analyst reveals extraordinary risks taken to seize Maduro." And they have the video here, the now famous video, I guess, of the Maduro raid, where it appears that there's missiles coming from a helicopter to suppress enemy fire from the compound, and then it looks like an aberrant shoulder-fired man pad comes out of the compound. It doesn't look like it went anywhere, but obviously because we didn't lose any aircraft, it didn't go anywhere. But the part of the article says, quote, Maduro came down to an intense final firefight in which U.S. helicopters were exposed to an extraordinarily level of risk as they descended into a heavily fortified compound in Caracas, end quote. What do you think about that? Extraordinarily high level of risk that they took. Something out of the ordinary, or is this Osama bin Laden type risk, or what are we talking here?
I think this is a large discussion on, were they just doing their job? During the 2 decades of operations within the Middle East, and I'll use the template executed from Black Hawk Down as an example, and there was inherent risk, daylight raid, enemy knew you were coming, all those things, and I think you can apply that same sort of template across multiple operations. And when you've rehearsed it so many times and you have worked with the customer group so often that you don't do it till you get it right, you do it till you can't get it wrong, you have an understanding that you're just doing your job. And when we talk about missions that are extraordinary or extremely dangerous, and right, wrong, or indifferent, a lot of times it's just another day at the office. The aviation professionals, the intelligence apparatus, the refuelers, the mission planners, everybody that operates to ensure that level of success understands the risks in which they are partaking. And sometimes one mission's not any more significant from a risk perspective than another. One just happens to make the news.
How much does surprise play into the operation? Because, if you look at the Osama bin Laden raid, ostensibly, he didn't even know we knew where he was. So the Osama bin Laden raid, I would guess, had way more, a higher level of surprise compared to the Maduro raid, where he knew that we knew where he was, and he knew that we knew where he was, and we had been doing aggressive operations on the Venezuelan shore. How much does surprise come into play in this?
I think surprise is absolutely critical to the success of the operation. Whether you want to call it, generalized surprise or specific surprise, whether it was Fadid in Mogadishu, Noriega in Panama, all of these large operations where you were able to use the element of surprise, you may have a generalized understanding that somebody's getting ready to knock on your door, but it's hard to be able to live with that sense of concern uh, for a long period of time. With 2 decades of similar operations under their belt, uh, the Special Forces organizations as a task force in its entirety know when to strike when there's an optimal chance of success. There's a complex decision matrix that's put into play. All the conditions have to be met to ensure that you've mitigated everything that you can. And surprise is often a big element of that understanding. And you have other intelligence community assets are telling you, we think he knows, he doesn't know, she doesn't know, she knows, that give you that sense of understanding that this is the right time. This is going to capitalize on that element of surprise to ensure success for this operation.
Along those lines, you talked briefly about optimization, optimizing the operation. Is there a kind of an optimization curve between risk in terms of speed and surprise, and then protection? So do you get to a point like a star on the map where you say, okay, they know we're here now, the shooting has begun, so we're going to pull back a little bit and be more deliberate, versus we're trying to penetrate as fast as possible until they know we're here, and then we switch gears?
Absolutely. We used to call this, the X and the Y model, where if you land on the X, you're landing in somebody's backyard. And speed, audacity is, and that level of shock and surprise is the advantage you need for that particular operation. Where we talked about going to an offset, maybe I'm going to land, 3 or 4 Ks off in the desert and let the operators walk in and have a bit more of a understanding on how they're going to get there. In an urban environment, it's much more difficult to do an offset infill because obviously there's a lot of stuff going around. It's a long walk and there's a lot of things to be exposed to. So each individual mission is going to be looked at independently on what the best methodology would be to achieve that end state of being able to take the individual with the least level of risk. And you want to have as little exchange of gunfire as possible. It's not something that you want to go in guns blazing, but sometimes that's what's required to suppress what's taking place.
Yeah, it sounds like this was a more of a guns blazing scenario because those videos definitely showed those Blackhawks lighting up somebody, suppressing enemy fire from the compound. What's more dangerous? I'm just curious. What's more dangerous? Helicopter flying in an urban environment where anybody can pop out from any window and shoot an RPG at you, or going across an open desert where radar systems have a clear line of sight from you from far off? What do you think is more dangerous?
I think that's an individual preference. I prefer the urban environment personally. Flying over the water, flying over a desert at extremely low altitudes to evade the radar signature. So curvature of Earth helps you. You stay at a certain altitude, you're going to stay underneath those sensors and those detection systems. And it's pretty sporty. And then when visibility starts to get reduced, it's like almost flying within a golf ball. Not a big fan. So big lights, bright lights, big city, I was more comfortable with taking those sort of risks. Just me personally. I think everybody sees this differently. And it also goes into how do you plan to execute the mission itself? How do you use wind, the environment, masking? What are all those techniques you can use to try to remain silent or concealed until the last second when you no longer have an option but have to expose yourself and get in as fast as possible?
In that article, that CNN article, and I'll put that in the show notes, everybody can read it. They talked about the most dangerous parts of a mission are the 1 minute when the helicopter's coming in and the 1 minute when the helicopter's leaving. because it's slow, it's rising at a predictable rate. Is that the pucker factor time for everybody? Is that when
Absolutely.
you're like, okay, here we go?
Traditionally, you give a 10-minute call, a 6-minute call, and a 1-minute call. And even sitting here talking to you, Tony, every time I use the word 1 minute, my heart starts to run. And that for me, because you had done a lot of homework, a lot of preparation, a lot of rehearsing, and you've essentially memorized from your release point that last 3 to 5 kilometers to the target. You know all the terrain, you're counting buildings, you understand where any obstacles are. So you're really, you're in flow, you're focused, you're on. There's an unwritten rule that if one aircraft in the flight lands, everybody's going in. So it's the agreement we have with our ground force that I'm going to make sure that we give you all you need to be successful. So if that means I'm going to ball this thing up on the objective, well, that's what I'm going to do, because I'm going to do everything I can in my power to ensure you have the force required to create success. There's been more than one time where, similar to what you're seeing in the video, where we had, and there are times where we rehearse this as well, gunships are coming overhead and there's brass coming through the rotor system and ting, 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 it's hitting the windshield. But there's also, just like there's a trust in the cockpit, there's a trust with your peers who I know if they're putting those rounds in the right place to protect me. So the fact that they leave a little brass on my rotor system, I'm okay with that, because they needed to put that shot where it needed to go to protect me on infill. And that's that 1 minute call, those pre-assault fires. And the same thing on exfil. They're in a cap overhead. They're going to suppress anything. They're talking to me. We're communicating well to understand what's going on around me. So absolutely, that 1 minute inbound and that initial exfil when you're leaving in that first minute after you pick up your precious cargo is extremely vulnerable.
Do you have, like, you talked about communications on the objective? Do you have like an airborne JTAC where you talk to the fast movers, or you're just talking to the rotary guys? How does communication work when you're trying to coordinate fast movers suppressing and your air support, that from other helicopters? How does that all work? It seems very confusing to me, complex.
It's extremely complex. And I think I mentioned it last week. It's a complex aerial ballet executed and synchronized with the utmost precision. Usually there's a fire support coordinator with the ground force, and they are the primary coordination element for all the fires that are taking place. Sometimes you'll have an airborne controller, and sometimes that responsibility is even held within the regiment, some of the fires platforms. But they are ensuring that they have a good understanding of what's taking place on the ground, in the air, and all of that deconfliction. And I think he used the metaphor of an upside down wedding cake with multiple layers, and everybody has a block of space within their layer, if you will, to be able to conduct operations, whether that's an ISR platform or fires platform, fixed wing, rotor wing. The fire support coordinator has the responsibility to make sure that that area is clear when they call for that, whatever the appropriate ordinance is for that time. And as an aviator, you're always monitoring the fire's channel, but you understand that that's somebody else's responsibility to clear the airspace. You just want to make sure you're not there.
What do you think those guys thought? Kind of changing gears here. I'm just curious about the Osama bin Laden raid was kind of similar, I would imagine, to this. What were those guys thinking when that tail rotor on the Stealth Blackhawk hit the wall, and they knew at that moment that they were not going to fly this helicopter out of that compound, out of the Osama bin Laden Abbottabad compound?
Abbottabad. Being a guy that was in school when all that took place, I'm not sure who owns that responsibility, but I think you can see a similar challenge in a recent civilian helicopter incident, settling with power, where there's a point in time where in a helicopter, you're just along for the ride. No matter what control movements you do, it's not going to make a difference.
Yeah.
Environmental conditions change. Uh, you try to do the best you can and be as diligent as possible with your pre-mission planning, and you're constantly updating your systems en route. But based on the environmental actions and the weather patterns of the objective area, you try to have an understanding of what that's going to look like. But there are times either you have too much gas, you have too many people, or it's a lot hotter than you expect it to be. And the aircraft, you're always flying at the razor's edge of the capacity of that airplane. They are complex machines, but they're heavy. You're trained well and you do high gross operations often, but sometimes things happen and you don't get the benefit of the doubt and you plant it where you don't want to plant it. So in that situation, you're trained to know what to do next. You have, they'll call it a lame duck. You're broke on the objective, and you rapidly transition from being an aviator to being somebody pulling security on the perimeter. And once you're assessed and you're uh, ensuring that the crew is safe and mobile, you that's why you're trained to shoot, move, and communicate, just like the ground force. Not nearly as good as the ground force. I'm thankful, knock on wood, that I never had that experience, but I had a really good friend in Iraq that, we were young captains at the time. We're both exchanging duties as the air mission commander. And we joked as we were leaving the planning area to go on a mission that I'm like, Reggie, you got it. You're the air mission commander this time. I'm just the pilot. And I was excited about not having to do any extra work as the air mission commander. And sure as the world, after infill, unfortunately, they had a hard landing, and Reggie planted his aircraft on the objective and rapidly became a guy on perimeter security. I had to take over responsibilities for coordinating the rest of the mission. But that level of training, the next up, you're always prepared for the contingencies that present themselves. So even in that example, in Pakistan, there were contingencies in place to be able to make up for whatever was lost on the objective, whether that's pulling extra people out, taking care of that aircraft, taking care of those people. So you're always planning through second, third level contingencies.
Yeah, apparently the Chinook pilot on the Maduro raid took 3 rounds in the lower body, and he flew the thing back to whatever naval vessel they took off of. And then there was another Chinook instantly en route to take his place as he got shot up. Apparently, as the story goes, the unclassified version goes. So it's unclear if that guy got shot going in and he's still, he's bleeding out and he's still completing the mission and he's landing people, or he got shot, after he dropped everybody off. Who knows? We won't know for a while probably, but yeah, dangerous job.
There was a similar event that took place 2015-ish, and there was a DAP pilot who took rounds on infill, and then continued to fly for another 8 hours and never told anybody. And it wasn't literally until he got back to the staging base that an ops guy physically ran out and stopped a C-17 so they could get him on the plane, because they thought he may lose his leg from the amount of blood that was lost. And he didn't tell his co-pilot until they were almost home, hey, brother, I might need you to land us because I got shot back there. But that mentality. So when I heard what took place with the recent event and that Chinook pilot that took rounds, no surprise. Guys like Mike and Dave and Eli, and I can just think through folks that have had that experience. Billy, just reflecting back in Mosul in 2005, we had a pilot took a round through the neck. They had a shooter as a little bird, had a sniper on board. Sniper got shot. They land at the cache, the hospital to take care of the sniper and the pilot who took the round to the neck. The other pilot shuts it down and then goes and knocks on the door. And they're like, "Hey, we're busy." And he was like, "I know, I got shot too." So he took rounds in the knee. So the front end of the aircraft gets shot up and he flies it back safely, gets the other two guys who were shot worse than him to the cache. And then he goes and knocks on the door and says, "Hey, I got shot too." So there have been multiple examples of that calm. I'll use the word calm under fire, that they understand the significance of what they're doing and they will fly it until it stops.
Well, I can appreciate I guess the intrepid, nature of their focus. Also, that's probably something your co-pilot needs to know right away. like if I was the co-pilot, I would have been like, "You could have told me that 20 minutes ago," just in case.
I'm sure they had that
all of a sudden you
conversation.
pass out, and I'm sure they had straight talk after that. What do you think about Army aviation transformation? Recently, it was released that the Army's cutting 6,500 aviation jobs in the new, going to ostensibly, I guess it's because they're going to drones. They're going to less, more efficient maintenance programs. What do you think about the future of aviation in terms of drones and FPV drones and protection and the modern battlefield, Ukraine, all that stuff?
Tony, you're going to pull me out on a ledge here. I believe that the Army is a little ahead of its skis. And as a retiree, I can probably say that. I believe that there are decisions being made that are very monocular, that are based on one case study. And I think what's taken place recently and the level of success, that manned platform still has a significant place in the national security apparatus for us to be successful in a large-scale combat operation. The other services are increasing what they're using with pairing and teaming with drones and manned platforms. The Army talked about that and then made a very radical shift away from manned platforms. If you look at any business, the number one cost that you have is personnel. So if I can cut 6,500 jobs, those are people I'm not paying. So there is a cost savings from a budgetary standpoint. The platforms, they cut about 1,000 helicopters. I think it's about 300 Apaches and about 700 Blackhawks manned platforms. We may find in hindsight over the next 5 to 10 years that may have been a little bit of a brash decision to make, and that we're going to end up supporting the commercial industrial base by rebuying some of these platforms in the future. There is definitely a place for autonomous systems, both subsurface, we're talking naval, waterway sort of, and within the aviation environment. I'm not convinced that it is a one-for-one and a replacement that needs to take place today. The Army is operating, I think, as diligently as they can, and they're trying to use the resources available. And Army Aviation is a huge target because of the cost of operations, and they're trying to put some of those resources in other places. 5 years from now, I may have to come back and we'll do another podcast and I'll tell you, I was completely wrong, and that's the case. But as of right now, I think we're a little bit, that may not have been the best decision, but we'll see how the Army adapts and what it can do to support what it thinks it's going to have to do in a LISCO environment.
I can imagine that the budget of aviation, if you cut 10% of the Army aviation budget, that's a big chunk of the light infantry budget.
Oh, absolutely.
Relatively speaking. What can a, maybe not from a special operations perspective, because it's way more complex, than normal, being a bus driver in Iraq, going from one fob to the other. Why can't you have a robot basically fly a Black Hawk from fob A to fob B versus why do you need a human in that cockpit, I guess, would be my question.
That's a great question, Tony. I think there's a place, Sikorsky just came out with, an autonomous Black Hawk, and the front section opens up and you get a large storage capacity. And I think there's a place for maybe casualty evacuation, resupply, general troop transport, that you could accomplish that with an autonomous pilot. There are still, in certain environments where, and there's a debate right now at the commercial aviation industry, do you have two pilots in the cockpit for, let's say, with American Airlines, do you replace one with a robot or an autonomous pilot sitting back somewhere else? Two pilots or manned aviation is there for when things go wrong, not when everything's going smoothly. So that is your second and third level contingency to be able to execute appropriately. So talking back to recent events in Venezuela, let's say that pilot was incapacitated, or that was the autonomous pilot that was incapacitated from that side of the aircraft. What is your secondary or your redundant system to be able to support and continue the operation? The measure of safety on board when the risk is assumed by the guy in the cockpit, not the individual sitting behind a computer screen. They don't have any skin in the game. Or if it's a simulation or a computer program that's running the operation, there's inherently no understanding on what's taking place. And maybe that's, from an engineering standpoint, engineers would always like to take the human error out of it. There's probably some application for that. Me personally, I wouldn't want to fly on something that doesn't have a living, breathing human on the other end.
Yeah, it seems like there's a certain level of comfort, not looking up at the cockpit and not seeing a pilot would be disheartening to me. What about aviation protection in the future?
Mm-hmm.
Because some of these FPV drones now can go 200 miles an hour, which is, faster or at least as fast as Army Aviation assets. So now you have $2,000 drones. Everybody can print them in their basement, and they can take out helicopters. What is the future of aviation going to look like in an environment where there's a million tiny 200-mile-an-hour drones?
I think there's always a punch counterpunch, and we'll see where industry takes this, and those smart people that work at DARPA and those other testing labs on how do you counter aviation survival equipment, flares, chaff, EM hardening. All of those have evolved over time as a reaction to what's taking place on the ground, whether it was, radio jammers in Iraq trying to defeat IEDs. Essentially, now you're going to figure out how do you defeat an airborne improvised explosive device. That's what's going to happen. You're going to find a way from an electronic magnetic spectrum or some sort of distraction system, another type of flare, to be able to defeat whatever that new threat is as it evolves over time. Again, it's a punch and a counterpunch. They're going to have some effectiveness early on. How do we adjust and grow from that aspect?
I guess what I worry about and what I think about is if that is the case, and we will find a technological solution to FPV drones or similar small commercial drones that can interfere with aviation in general, will it be quick enough before it shuts down commercial aviation as a whole? So, before terrorists can attack multiple airports and airliners coming in and out of airports, before terrorists can sit in Washington, D.C. in an apartment building somewhere and attack Marine One as the president takes off from the White House, will it be quick enough not to hobble commercial aviation worldwide? That's what keeps me up at night, thinking about all these FPV drones and technology.
That's a great question and a great problem set. I've never been a part of HMX-1 and Marine One to understand their total aircraft survivability equipment suite. I would imagine it's probably pretty robust. And there may be some technologies there. Like I said, I don't know for sure, but there may be some technologies there that are already able to do encounter the scenario in which you described, but at a pretty significant price point. And how do you apply that same technology? Excuse me, or how do we find a place to be able to protect our commercial environment from something like that? And I think industry is going to have to look at that, and all the appropriate agencies on what kind of threat. And if you look at that risk reward calculus and the cost required, but that's definitely something that needs to be entertained at the highest level.
Mm. Yeah, it's disturbing. It's a brave new world out there, and maybe with every bad technology or negative technology, there's always something good comes out of it, hopefully. Kyle, thanks. I got one last question for you. In the special operator community, it is fairly common for the operators to use performance-enhancing drugs, steroids, human growth hormone, other things. Did you have a big problem with that with the pilots? Were they always in the gym getting jacked?
Yeah. The responsible folks, ego drives a lot. And when you're living and working with the ground force and you see those dudes in the gym, you go to the gym. They're doing 100 burpees, you're going to do 100 burpees. And if you're going to roll on the mat, they're going to roll.
So just for the record, the SOAR regiment pilots are way more buff than regular active duty pilots. I just want to make that clear for the record.
I'll make that distinction. I particularly am not as fit as I once was or like to be, but even within the community, you want to be able to, you want to hang with the ground force, but also that drove the iron sharpens iron mentality and the gyms and the Thor facilities and the H2F programs that the Army is now trying to implement across all the conventional force, or Gen Pop, if you will, started in the soft community, and aviation was a part of that, with nutritionists, with strength conditioning coaches, with physical therapists, and folks trying to optimize how well you can perform and how long do we extend your life. Most of the aviators, the old folks that were on that recent mission were probably aviators, and there's probably some 49-year-olds. I think that was probably a Night Stalker pilot, and he was probably in the gym that day, because you're trying to extend your life as long as possible.
Yeah. And it helps to be physically fit if something goes wrong, I'm sure. Well, I'm glad they're there. I'm glad they're doing what they're doing. And after the Maduro raid, they probably bought themselves at least another 10 or 15 years, even in the looking down the barrel of drones replacing combat aviation. It's definitely a high water mark for Special Operations Aviation last 2 weeks ago, for sure.
I got to give a plug. The current command group at the regiment, the commander and their chief warrant officer, are physical freaks, and I've worked out with both of them. So I think they emulate that sort of mentality. Got to give them a shout out. Love them both, and still have contacts with a lot of guys in the organization. But to your point, they are driven to be optimal in everything they do in their life.
America owes them a debt of gratitude, for sure. Kyle, thank you. This has been great. I appreciate your time. And this has been a lot of good background knowledge that I think people want to know about. How did they pull this thing off? What do they do, there in the SOAR? So thank you.
Appreciate your time, Tony. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Okay. Bye-bye.
The Flash Traffic Podcast.